The first sound that broke the quiet night was a man's desperate voice. "Ma'am, don't get in the car." Aveline froze with one hand on the door handle of her sedan, her pulse leaping as if the world around her had suddenly tilted. The street was calm a moment ago, just the faint hum of traffic in the distance, a breeze stirring through the rows of parked cars. Now everything seemed sharper, colder, as those words cut through the air like a warning shot. From the corner of her eye she caught sight of him, a janitor in a grey uniform sprinting out from the side entrance of the office tower, his face pale, his chest heaving. "Ethan." His voice cracked with urgency, his eyes fixed on her like she was the only person that mattered in the world. Two security guards in dark suits moved fast, blocking his path. One barked at him to stay back, his hand raised in a stiff gesture of authority. To Aveline, the scene felt unreal, like a line had just been drawn between two versions of her life, the one where she got into the car as planned, and the one where she stopped and listened. Her fingers trembled against the cold chrome handle. She glanced at Ethan, then at the silent black sedan waiting with its tinted windows. The driver hadn't moved, but something about the stillness felt off, too patient, too rehearsed. Ethan shouted again, louder this time. "Please don't!" Her heart thudded so hard she thought it might split her chest. She didn't know if he was saving her from danger or dragging her into chaos, but in that instant, instinct told her one thing: trust the fear in his eyes. And so, against every expectation, Aveline let go of the door handle. Aveline's hand slipped away from the car door, and in that instant the driver's eyes flicked up in the rear-view mirror. She couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something unsettling about how calm he looked, as if her hesitation annoyed him. The engine gave a low growl, though the car hadn't moved an inch. "Step back, ma'am," one of the guards said firmly, his body shifting to shield her. "He doesn't belong here." He tilted his head toward Ethan, who was still being held back by the second guard. Ethan's voice cut through the tension, ragged but insistent. "Aveline, please, you don't know who's in that car." The way he said her name stopped her cold. It wasn't the voice of a stranger grasping at shadows. It was the voice of someone who carried fear not for himself, but for her. Her chest tightened as memories flickered. Long nights at the office when he'd quietly mopped the floors, always polite, always fading into the background. She never thought he even noticed her, but now he looked at her like her life was in his hands. "Let him talk," Aveline whispered, her voice breaking the standoff. The guard nearest to her frowned. "Ma'am, we need to keep you safe." "Exactly," she said, her eyes locked on Ethan, "which is why I need to hear what he has to say." There was a pause, a fragile silence heavy enough to crush the night. The hum of the car's engine seemed louder now, the faint tremor of vibration running through the pavement beneath her heels. The driver remained motionless, his hands tight on the steering wheel, like someone waiting for the wrong cue. Finally, the guard released Ethan's arm with a warning glare. Ethan stumbled forward, chest rising and falling as though every breath cost him strength. His eyes darted to the car, then back to Aveline. "Don't open that door," he said quietly, almost like a plea. "You were never meant to get home tonight." The words landed like ice water down her spine. Aveline's pulse hammered in her ears, her breath uneven as Ethan's warning settled into her bones. The guard closest to the car tensed, one hand brushing against the weapon at his side, eyes fixed on the driver who still hadn't said a word. The silence was too sharp, too deliberate. Then the engine revved, a sudden sharp roar that shattered the stillness. Headlights flared, blinding for a second, as if the car was daring them to move. Aveline flinched, instinctively stepping back until her shoulders brushed against the cold glass of the building behind her. Ethan moved without hesitation. He put himself between her and the vehicle, his body squared, his voice steady, even though his hands shook. "You're not taking her," he said, loud enough to cut across the noise. The driver shifted, finally leaning forward into the glow of the dashboard. For the first time, Aveline saw his face. Something about him. It wasn't just the blank stare, but the way his mouth curled in the faintest hint of recognition, as if she was exactly where he expected her to be. The guard barked an order. "Turn off the engine and step out now." But the driver didn't move. The car stayed in place, humming like a predator crouched and waiting. The smell of gasoline mixed with the faint burn of rubber on asphalt. Aveline's throat went dry. She didn't know who to trust or what Ethan had seen, but something in her gut screamed that this wasn't random. That man behind the wheel hadn't come for a mistake. He had come for her. Ethan looked back at her, eyes raw with urgency. "Please," he said under his breath, "just listen to me. Walk away from this car." And for the first time that night, Aveline realised she was caught in something far bigger than she could control. The street seemed to shrink around them, the glow of the headlights locking Aveline in place like a spotlight she didn't ask for. She could feel her own heartbeat pressing against her ribs, as if her body already knew what was coming before her mind could catch up. The driver's hand twitched on the wheel. In the same instant, the car jolted forward, tyres screeching against the pavement. Aveline gasped and stumbled back, but Ethan was already moving. He lunged, grabbing her by the arm, pulling her hard to the side. The air whipped past her face as the vehicle surged forward, missing them by only a few feet. One of the guards reacted too late, throwing his shoulder against the car as it swerved, the sound of metal scraping against flesh echoing in Aveline's head. The other guard shouted into his radio, his voice a blur of commands, but the car was already disappearing into the night, its taillights shrinking like angry red eyes retreating into the dark. Aveline's knees buckled, but Ethan kept her upright, his grip firm, steady, grounding her. Her chest rose and fell in ragged bursts, every breath tasting like fear. "What was that? Who was that?" she demanded, her voice breaking as she looked up at him. Ethan didn't answer right away. His face was pale, his jaw tight, as if he was holding something back. Finally, he said softly, almost too quietly for her to hear, "Someone who shouldn't know where you are, but they do." The words struck her deeper than the rush of danger just moments before. If what he said was true, then this wasn't just chance. Whoever that man was, he had been waiting for her. And as the distant echo of the engine faded, Aveline realised her world had just tilted into a place where nothing felt safe anymore. The night felt heavier after the car vanished, as if the air itself carried the warning that this wasn't over. Aveline's guard, who had stumbled against the car, stood bent forward, clutching his shoulder, his breath sharp with pain. Ethan stepped toward him, steady but urgent. "You need a medic," he said, his tone low yet certain. The guard shook his head, teeth clenched. "I'm fine, just bruised. I'll hold." But the look in his eyes told a different story. He wasn't fine. Aveline's gaze flicked between them, her throat tightening. "This is insane," she whispered. "I'm not some target. Why would anyone—" She stopped, the words breaking apart under the weight of her own disbelief. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip warmer than she expected, anchoring her when her world felt like it was splintering. "It doesn't matter why right now," he said quietly. "What matters is keeping you safe. Whoever was behind that wheel didn't come to scare you. They came to take you." Aveline froze. The sentence cut through her panic, leaving behind something colder, realization. The second guard still had his radio pressed tight, barking quick updates. "Units on the way, we need to move her now." Ethan nodded. No more standing in the open. They already found us once, they could circle back. He guided Aveline toward the shadows near the side of the building, each step echoing like a decision she hadn't agreed to but couldn't refuse. Her heels clicked against the concrete, the sound strangely loud in the silence that followed the chaos. "Ethan," she finally managed, her voice trembling but insistent, "what are you not telling me?" He didn't answer right away. His profile, sharp in the faint light, was unreadable. At last, he glanced at her, his eyes carrying something both protective and weighed down. "The less you know tonight, the safer you'll be. But I promise you'll get answers. Just not here. Not like this." And though fear still rattled in her chest, Aveline noticed the way he stayed close, the way his hand never faltered on hers. For the first time that night, she wasn't sure if she feared the danger outside, or the truth Ethan was holding back. They didn't head for the main street. Instead, Ethan led Aveline down a narrow service alley, the kind of back way workers used to haul deliveries in before dawn. The air smelled faintly of damp cardboard and old coffee grounds, but the shadows offered what they needed most: cover. Aveline's guards followed close, one of them limping but refusing to slow. Every few steps the other swept his eyes across the rooftops and corners, his hand steady on the radio as if clinging to a lifeline. Aveline's chest heaved with uneven breaths. "This isn't real," she whispered, as though repeating it might make it true. "Things like this don't happen, not to me." Ethan kept his pace steady, his hand hovering near the small of her back. "It is real. And whoever's pulling the strings knows where to find you. That means we can't rely on chance. We move quiet, we move smart." She turned toward him, searching his face under the faint glow of a buzzing light above the alley. "You talk like you've done this before." For a second, his jaw tightened, his silence louder than any confession. Then he looked away, scanning the end of the alley. "Let's just say I've been close enough to know the difference between fear and danger. And right now, you're standing in both." The alley spilled out onto a deserted side street. Across the way, the glass of a shuttered diner reflected a low beam of headlights sliding past, not fast, not casual, just drifting by, too slow to be normal. Aveline's breath caught. Ethan's arm shot out, pulling her gently but firmly back against the brick wall, his body shielding hers. The car moved on, but its sound lingered, like a promise it would return. For a long moment, the only thing Aveline could hear was Ethan's heartbeat pressed close to her ear, strong, steady, but carrying a weight she couldn't name. When the car finally disappeared around the bend, Ethan pulled back, his voice firm. "We can't stay on the streets. They're circling, we need a safe house." Aveline's lips parted as though to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. This wasn't a suggestion. It was survival. And for the first time, she realized Ethan wasn't just protecting her. He was hiding something that made him part of the danger too. Ethan guided Aveline and her guards through side streets until the city noise thinned into quiet blocks. The neon glow gave way to the dim hum of street lamps, each one buzzing faintly, casting uneven light over cracked sidewalks. Finally, he stopped in front of a narrow brick building tucked between a laundromat and a vacant storefront. Its windows were dark, its doorway unremarkable, exactly what he needed. He fished a worn key from his pocket and glanced back at her. "No cameras here, no one watching, we'll be safe for a while." Aveline hesitated on the threshold, looking at him as if weighing whether to trust his word. Her guards exchanged glances too, uncertain but out of options. They followed him inside. The apartment smelled faintly of old paint and cedar. The furniture was sparse, just a small couch, a chipped table, and curtains drawn tight. It wasn't welcoming, but it was quiet. Ethan switched on a single lamp, the soft glow barely filling the room. Aveline lowered herself onto the couch, pressing her hands together in her lap. The silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Finally, she asked, her voice small, "Why do you even have a place like this?" Ethan set the key on the table and leaned against the wall, arms folded. For a moment he didn't answer. His eyes shifted, searching the floor before finally meeting hers. Because sometimes you need a place to disappear, somewhere no one would think to look. Her breath caught at his words, the weight in his tone leaving little doubt this wasn't the first time he'd hidden away from something. The older of the two guards cleared his throat, stepping forward. "With all due respect, sir, we can't just sit here waiting. They'll track her, they always do." Ethan nodded. "I know, but we need a plan, not panic. If we run blind, we'll walk right into them." His eyes cut back to Aveline, steady and unflinching. "You trust me enough to stay hidden until I figure out who's pulling this?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to demand answers, to push back against the walls closing in. But the way he spoke, firm, calm, carrying a quiet certainty, made her pause. Aveline leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it might give her clarity. When she finally spoke, her words were barely above a whisper. "For now, I don't have a choice." And in the flickering light of that bare apartment, the distance between them felt smaller, but the questions hanging over them grew larger. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the crunch of dry leaves under their shoes. Ethan slowed his steps, tilting his head slightly, like he was listening for something Aveline couldn't hear. She caught it a moment later, a faint hum in the distance, the low growl of an engine crawling along the back road. Her heart jumped into her throat. "They're still looking," Ethan whispered, pulling her gently toward the tree line. They crouched low, hidden by branches and the dark. A pair of headlights swept across the dirt road, too close, too slow, like whoever was inside wasn't just driving, they were searching. Aveline pressed her back against the rough bark of an oak, every muscle stiff, her breath caught in her chest. Ethan's arm brushed against her shoulder, steadying her without a word. The truck rolled past, its lights cutting through the night like blades. She dared not move, dared not breathe. Only when the sound faded into the distance did Ethan finally exhale. "We have to keep moving," he said, his voice low but calm. "They'll circle back." Aveline's legs trembled as she pushed away from the tree, but she nodded. Her shoes were already damp with dew, her blouse sticking uncomfortably to her skin. Still, when Ethan glanced at her, she forced a quiet, almost defiant smile. "I'm fine," she whispered, though both of them knew it wasn't true. They started walking again, deeper into the woods where the moonlight barely touched the ground. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The danger still lingered in the air, sharp and close. But as they climbed a small hill, Aveline's steps faltered. Ethan caught her elbow just in time, steadying her. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed. "Guess I'm not built for running through forests." Ethan gave a faint smile, his hand still on her arm. "You're doing better than you think. Most people would have quit miles ago." Her laugh came out soft and shaky, but real. And in that moment, despite the danger, the exhaustion, the fear, Aveline realised something. It wasn't just that Ethan was helping her survive. He was reminding her that she could still endure, still push forward. Something she hadn't believed about herself in a long time. They moved on, the night swallowing them whole, the memory of those searching headlights pushing them faster into the dark. The woods seemed endless, each step sinking deeper into shadows. Aveline's breath grew heavier, her body reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal all day. Her stomach twisted in protest, but she bit down on the discomfort, not wanting Ethan to notice. Still, he glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, as if he could sense the truth. "You need food," he said quietly. "There's a gas station not far from here, but we'll have to risk it. Places like that, they keep their eyes open at night." Her heart skipped. The thought of light, of shelves lined with food, felt almost too good to be real. But risk meant exposure. "What if they're waiting there?" she whispered. "They might be," he admitted. "That's why we move carefully." A branch cracked somewhere behind them, not close, but close enough. Aveline's body stiffened. She turned her head, scanning the dark, but saw nothing. The sound could have been an animal, or it could have been something worse. Ethan placed a hand on her back, urging her forward. They pushed through the trees until the faint glow of a streetlight shimmered through the leaves. The small gas station sat on the corner of a deserted road, its neon sign flickering weakly. A beat-up sedan was parked by the pumps, empty, engine cold. The place looked harmless, but Aveline felt a knot tighten in her chest. Harmless was often the most dangerous disguise. "Stay close," Ethan murmured. They crept across the lot, every sound magnified, the buzz of the sign, the drip of water from the roof, the hollow thud of her shoes on cracked pavement. Aveline tried to focus on the normalcy of it all, to pretend this was any other night. She even caught herself thinking of late evenings years ago, when she used to stop for coffee after long shifts, when life felt simple. The memory stung, but it also kept her moving. Inside, the station was dim, aisles half-stocked, a small television flickering behind the counter with no one watching. Aveline reached for a granola bar, her hands trembling slightly. She tore it open and handed half to Ethan before she could think twice. "Don't argue," she said softly, almost teasing, though her voice cracked with exhaustion. For a fleeting second, their eyes met, and the weight of the night lifted just enough to let something warmer through. Then Ethan's gaze shifted to the glass door, his jaw tightening. "We can't stay long," he whispered. Aveline turned her head and saw it too. The slow roll of headlights far down the road, creeping closer. The headlights cut through the night like two sharp blades, creeping closer with every passing second. Aveline's pulse raced as she pressed herself against the shelf, clutching the half-eaten granola bar. Ethan's hand was already on her arm, steady and firm. "We need to move," he whispered. His voice was calm, but she felt the urgency beneath it. They slipped behind the counter, crouching low, the smell of stale coffee and cleaning solution filling Aveline's nose. Through the glass, the car rolled to a stop by the pumps. The engine hummed, steady and unsettling. A door creaked open, then slammed shut. Boots scuffed against the pavement. Whoever it was, they weren't here for snacks. Aveline's throat tightened. She thought of the stupid, ordinary things, how her clothes were damp from the mist, how her hair clung to her cheek, how she would give anything for a warm shower and a soft bed. For a moment, those simple comforts felt like another life. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Ethan peered through a gap in the counter and tensed. He reached down, his hand brushing hers. "Stay down," he mouthed. Aveline swallowed hard, her body trembling, not just from fear, but from exhaustion. She pulled her knees closer to her chest, trying to make herself small, invisible. In the silence, she caught herself remembering a late summer night years ago, when she and her friends had laughed under streetlights after grabbing sodas from a corner store. The memory flashed cruelly against the danger of this moment, reminding her of how quickly safety could vanish. The footsteps paused right outside the door. A shadow crossed the glass. Aveline held her breath until her chest ached. Ethan leaned forward, ready for whatever came next. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps turned. The door opened, a bell chimed, and the stranger walked inside. The grass brushed against Aveline's legs as she stumbled through the darkness, Ethan's silhouette just a few feet ahead. The trees loomed closer, their branches bending under the weight of the night, promising cover, but also shadows that could hide anyone. Behind them, the sudden slam of a door broke the silence. Voices carried across the yard, sharp, commanding, too close. Aveline's heart lurched, and her breath came faster, uneven. For a moment she wanted to stop, to curl into the ground, but Ethan turned back just enough for their eyes to meet. "Keep moving," he whispered, urgent yet steady, and in that single look something anchored her. His calm was her lifeline. They slipped into the trees, the air thicker with pine and damp earth. Twigs cracked underfoot, each sound painfully loud in Aveline's ears. The guards moved with practiced silence, fanning out to watch every angle. Still, the distant crunch of boots behind them grew closer, like a warning that time was running out. Aveline's foot caught on a root, sending her crashing to one knee. Pain shot up her leg, but before panic could take hold, Ethan was there. He dropped beside her, his hand firm under her arm, pulling her up with quiet strength. "You're all right," he breathed, his voice low but certain, as if saying it could make it true. Aveline clung to him for half a second longer than she needed to, drawing courage from the steadiness in his eyes. There, under the cover of the trees, it struck her. He wasn't just protecting her because it was his duty. There was something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable in the way he never let her fall behind. The guards signalled again. Flashlights swept across the open yard behind them, thin beams cutting through the dark. The pursuers were closing in. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from Aveline's face and gave a small nod toward the deeper woods. "Trust me," he said softly, and without waiting for her reply, he guided her forward once more, his hand never leaving hers. Every step they took into the shadows felt both terrifying and strangely safe, because as long as Ethan led the way, Aveline knew she wasn't facing this night alone. The night had grown colder, the kind of chill that slipped under clothes and made every breath sting. Aveline wrapped her arms around herself, shivering as the drizzle turned into a steady, icy rain. Her shoes were soaked through, each step squelching against the cracked pavement. Ethan walked beside her, his shoulders tense, scanning the shadows as if the darkness itself could lunge forward at any moment. They passed a row of shuttered shops, their windows boarded and broken. Somewhere in the distance, a bottle shattered, followed by rough laughter. Ethan motioned for her to stay close. She obeyed, pressing near, her heart pounding again. The danger wasn't just behind them, it was everywhere, waiting. Her stomach growled loudly, almost comical in the silence. She let out a shaky laugh, quickly covering her mouth. Ethan glanced at her and smirked. the tension easing just a little. "Guess that granola bar wasn't enough," he whispered. She shrugged, embarrassed, but for a moment it felt almost normal. Two people out late, hungry, teasing each other. But the illusion shattered when a shadow flickered across the street, moving too fast to be wind. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, his arm instinctively moving in front of her. They both froze, listening. A dripping gutter echoed like footsteps. Aveline's chest tightened, her body trembling, unsure if it was the cold or the fear. She found herself wishing for something absurdly simple. A warm blanket, a hot drink, even the quiet hum of her apartment heater. Instead, she had rain in her eyes and fear in her lungs. Ethan leaned close, his voice barely audible. "We can't stay here." He nodded toward a narrow alley, dark and uninviting. Aveline's gut twisted, but she followed. They moved quickly, their breaths sharp and visible in the cold air. Behind them, faintly, came the sound of another bottle breaking. The alley led them out onto a quieter street, but the silence was unsettling. No traffic, no neon lights, just the wind pushing trash along the cracked sidewalk. Aveline hugged herself tighter, her blouse clinging damp against her skin. Her teeth began to chatter, and she hated how weak it made her feel. Ethan noticed and slipped off his jacket without a word. He draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment as if to make sure it stayed in place. The jacket smelled faintly of soap and something warm, grounding her in a night that felt anything but safe. They walked on, and Aveline's mind betrayed her with an uninvited memory. Heated car seats on winter mornings, the sound of her father's driver clearing the windshield before she even stepped outside. The contrast hit her so sharply that she stumbled on a loose stone. She caught herself embarrassed and muttered, "Guess I'm not built for nights like this." Ethan gave a faint smile, but his eyes kept darting toward the shadows. Suddenly, a loud clank echoed from a dumpster nearby. Both of them froze. Aveline's pulse shot up, her fingers tightening around the edge of his jacket. A stray cat bolted out, hissing as it disappeared into the dark. She let out a shaky breath, laughing nervously. "I almost had a heart attack." Ethan didn't laugh. He kept scanning the street, jaw tight. They finally reached the corner of an old laundromat, its flickering sign barely casting light. Aveline leaned against the wall, exhausted. Her stomach clenched with hunger, but she said nothing. Instead, she closed her eyes for just a second, letting the rain tap softly against her face. When she opened them, Ethan was still standing guard, watching the street like it could swallow them whole. For the first time that night, she felt a strange comfort in his vigilance. Like maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as the city wanted them to believe. The flickering laundromat sign buzzed above them, the only light on the deserted block. Aveline pulled the jacket closer around her and slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold concrete. Her legs ached, her stomach grumbled, and for the first time that night she admitted out loud, "I can't remember the last time I ate." Ethan crouched beside her, unzipping a pocket of his bag. He pulled out a half-crushed protein bar and handed it over. "Not much, but it's something." She hesitated, then laughed softly at herself as she took it. "You'd think I'd be used to skipping dinners. Half the time I used to just pick at hors d'oeuvres at parties and call it a meal." The memory stung, but she forced herself to take a bite. It was dry, bland, but it filled the silence between them. Just as she was finishing, a metallic scrape echoed from down the street. Ethan instantly rose, shoulders stiff, eyes narrowing into the dark. Aveline followed his gaze and caught the faint outline of someone across the road, too still to be a passer-by. Her heart quickened and she whispered, "Do you see that?" Ethan gave a short nod, his voice low. "Yeah, don't move." The figure lingered a moment longer before slipping back into the shadows. Aveline exhaled shakily, hugging the jacket tighter. She wanted to ask who it was, but the words stuck in her throat. Trying to ground herself, she glanced at Ethan. He was still watching the street, calm but alert, like a soldier who'd been here before. She whispered, almost to herself, "How do you do that? Stay steady when it feels like the ground's falling away?" He finally looked at her, a faint smile on his tired face. "You just keep moving, one step at a time." Aveline leaned back against the wall, her body heavy with exhaustion. For once, she didn't argue, didn't dwell on what she had lost. Instead, she let herself rest for a moment, listening to the rain and the steady rhythm of Ethan's breath beside her. The rain had picked up again, fine needles drifting sideways across the street. Aveline tucked her chin into the jacket, her teeth chattering despite the thick fabric. Ethan shifted closer, shielding her from the wind. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the low hum of the laundromat sign and the whisper of rain filled the silence. Then a sound cracked through it, glass crunching underfoot. Both their heads snapped toward the alley. A shadowed figure froze, caught in the half-light. Ethan's voice cut the air, calm yet firm. "Keep your head down." Aveline's chest tightened. She gripped the empty protein bar wrapper, its crinkle loud in her trembling hands. The figure lingered, then melted back into the dark. Still, the echo of his footsteps clung to her thoughts like smoke. Aveline forced a shaky laugh, desperate to steady herself. "You know, the last time I was this cold, I was 10. Stuck outside after ballet practice, waiting for a driver who never came. I thought I was going to freeze." Her voice softened, almost sheepish. At least back then, there was hot chocolate waiting at home. Ethan smirked faintly, eyes still scanning the street. "Hot chocolate, huh? Closest I ever had was watered-down cocoa powder at the base mess hall." The fear ebbed, just slightly, enough for Aveline to let a small smile slip through. She pulled her knees closer, resting her chin on them, whispering, "I guess we've both known colder nights than this." Ethan didn't answer right away. His shoulders stayed tense, gaze fixed outward, but then his hand brushed against hers on the cold concrete. Not a promise, not a plan, just presence. The city beyond was still restless, shadows shifting, danger near. But in that narrow doorway, beneath the flickering neon and the rain's steady murmur, Aveline felt something she hadn't in a long time. A fragile warmth, a reminder that even in the darkest corners connection could survive. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to rest, for the first time without fear. Whatever tomorrow brought, she knew this. She wasn't facing it alone. Even in the darkest nights, what truly carries us through is not wealth or power, but the simple presence of someone who chooses to stay by our side. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time and presence here. If this touched you, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Rain Inside for more stories that speak to the heart. I'll see you again soon, right here on Rain Inside.